Hey, you guys, and welcome to this week's edition of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart. Do I say that on every single one that I do? I think I only talk about things that are near and dear to my heart. But today, we're going to be talking about educating children. We're going to be talking about homeschooling, but even more than that, about homesteading can help to educate your children and what it can do for your children. We're going to be talking with my special guest today, Kody Hanner from Homestead Education. And so I'm going to bring her on in just a second. But first of all, a little bit of chit chat here on the homestead. We are busy preserving. I don't know what you guys are doing, but here we just continue to sail right on through the harvest season. And we're just putting up more and more and more. It's like the longer the season gets, the more I am thankful for my generally really short Idaho growing seasons because it's kind of fast and furious. But usually it's like we've kind of got it all encapsulated and we have, maybe a month at most of harvest. But then when we have a year like this where it started out so warm, so early, it feels like it just stretches and stretches. And I'm like, okay, enough already. Let's go ahead and just let the freeze come and kill everything because I'm done. I want to be done. But I'm really thankful for all of the food that we're getting up in the pantry this year. So it's kind of that mixed blessing, like keep working. We can keep doing it. We've got more coming in. But then, you never look at your full pantry and go, gee, I wish it wasn't quite so full. So I guess we're going to be thankful for that and choose to look at the blessings there. So that's what's going on here, mostly around Riverbend. And, just trying to keep up with all the milk and all the veggies, which is always enough. But we are looking at the homeschooling year. We tend to start a little bit later than most people. So we kind of follow the agricultural season a little bit more. And so homeschooling doesn't usually start for us until after the harvest starts to wrap up. But we're starting to really turn our attention now and starting to think about it. So this is a perfect topic for this time right now. And so I want to introduce to you Kody from Homestead Education. Kody has been actually writing curricula for educating kids on the homestead, which is just super exciting. And I'm going to talk a little bit more with Kody about that later. But welcome, Kody. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is
Really been looking forward to this.
thank you. It's great to have you. Now, here at our place, we have 11 children, but you also have a large family. You have 6 kids, is that right?
Okay. 6.
6. And let's see, do you homeschool all of them or is there mixed or?
I do homeschool. Well, I did homeschool all of them. We have 2 that are out of the house now. And then I have a 3-year-old who thinks he's getting homeschooled, but not so much.
Yeah. It's amazing how much they learn at some of those young ages, though. I think it's really fascinating to me to watch these little brains just suck up all the information when they're
Mhm.
so small. That's really fun. But you guys also have quite not only a homestead, but you actually farm and sell. I know you sell pigs. You raise and sell pigs. Is there anything else that you guys do?
Pigs is our main product. We do the piglets, whole hogs, half hogs, retail cuts. We go back and forth in milk. We took a year off from milk while I launched my business, and now we're everybody's bred again, so we're really excited. And yeah, I just sell seasonal products as they're available.
That's great. That's a good way to go. So you have a very busy household yourself. And when we're recording
Yes.
this right now, we've just wrapped up county fair. Kody actually lives in the same county that I do. So she's
Mhm.
a neighbor, she's a local and a friend. But you guys are really involved in, is it 4-H in your area
Yeah,
that you guys are super involved in? And so you are exhausted this week, I'm sure.
I am, but I have to tell you, fair is my favorite week of the year. I
That's good.
am like I'm bouncing with excitement all week long and probably annoy everybody.
Did you get your fair share of fried foods and all the good fair foods for the year?
You know, I always just hit up like there's Sealy Valley and Two Tones, which are two local restaurants to us. So, I mean, I'm sure you know that, but so I'm not really hitting up the fair food too much. It's my normal eating out food.
There you go. That's a good way to go. I went for one day. I took all the kids down. We only entered in one painting amongst our group. And
Oh,
I asked my daughter, who'd been there for several days, I said, okay, if I was going to get one bit of junk food from this fair, what would you recommend after you've like perused everything and seen it all? And she said it was the swirly shaved ice cream thing. I have never
oh
seen that.
yeah.
Did you see
My
those?
kids tried that, but I didn't.
They like take this skillet and they put ice. I don't even know how they do it. If they like melt the ice cream and then they put this, but it's a frozen skillet, like it's extremely cold. And so it instantly freezes it. And then they scrape it off and it rolls all up. And so you end up with like in one of these cups this size, like 6 or 7 little bits of like rolled ice
Huh.
cream. I have no way to describe it aside of like if you think of a chocolate shaving and it kind
Okay.
of curls up like that. That's what it was, but it was with ice cream. But then it was like these crazy flavors, like
Oh wow.
vanilla with pretzels and caramel and salted. That's the one I got. I thought that was really good. And so I was like, okay, for fair food once a year, that was a really good choice. And I shared my little cup with like 5 of my kids because
It
two
was
bites, and I was
it was
like, well,
kind of
okay, that's enough
pricey.
sugar for the
Yeah.
next year for me. But
Yeah,
good stuff.
I worked with your daughter Friday night at the dinner.
Oh, fun. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't know what to do with herself if she's not working. So she got bored hanging out at the fair and said, "Somebody put me to work." And she found a job where she could help people. So,
I liked it. That
anyways,
was good. Yeah, she was a couple stations down from me serving to the buyers for the auction, so that was really nice.
wow, that's good. That's great. So what kind of things do you guys have in your family? What goes into the fair as entries?
The kids have their market hogs, and then this year they didn't do any breeding pigs, but sometimes they do a breeding pig, and then we have a couple of dairy cows that go in. And like I said, this year we stepped back a little, but the kids usually do hiking and vet science and all the different things.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's great. Good. I'm sure that keeps you busy enough with just
Oh
what
yeah.
you did.
I'm a pig leader and I have 25 kids in my group, so I am exhausted.
Yeah, that's
I
a
get to be
lot
a
to keep
mom to a
track of.
lot of kids for a week.
And a lot of animals. Keep a lot of
Mhm.
animals happy and healthy in the middle of summer. That's an
Yeah, that was
important
hard.
job.
We have a sow who I'm pretty sure is gonna farrow today, and we've been checking on her constantly in this heat. I'm so worried about her.
So hopefully she does well and does okay because right now we're kind of in a heat spike and luckily
Mhm.
it looks like we're going to cool off in the next few days and
That's
that would be
good.
appreciated. Good. So, um, you know, homeschooling and homesteading are one of these things that just go so nicely hand in hand. And I think what we're talking about right here, just even being at the fair and all of these experiences, just this great example of this. That, there has been in the past this perception that homeschoolers are just these people who kind of sit and hide in their home and they're antisocial and maybe they don't know how to talk with other people, and they're kind of, I mean, maybe nerds, but is that maybe not a socially acceptable term anymore? I don't know. I'm
I don't
so
know.
not politically correct because I'm just not up to date with all this stuff. But
I like to point out to my kids all the time that they're socially awkward homeschoolers. So
there's really this picture of that just there's this awkwardness and they're not involved with things and they're not
Mhm,
socialized. And you go, oh my goodness, you put a homeschool and a homestead together and all of the events that happen. And you have a bunch of kids that are, I mean, is there such a thing as over socialized? Like all of a sudden they experience life from a whole different set of
mhm,
terms when they live on a homestead. They have to be responsible for so many different things. They have to get up and they have to do their chores. They have to, take care of something. If something doesn't get watered, it dies, and hopefully we're talking about a plant when they experience that the first time and not an animal. And, there's just this whole different mentality that goes into homesteading that I think complements this homeschooling so beautifully, that it creates this beautiful complete picture. And then when you can take that and get it involved in community and social events, it really takes it to the next level. So it's fun to hear about other families who are doing things out in the community and doing all of these different things. But let's just dive right in and talk about you a little bit, get to know you a little bit here. Were you raised on a homestead, or were you homeschooled?
I was not homeschooled. I actually loved my public school experience, but let's not even talk about how many years ago that was, but it was a different time for sure. And I went to school in a really small community. I grew up in Northern California, but I grew up in a town of 1700 where my family was sixth generation. And so even though went to public school, it was a completely different experience. I had the same teachers that my parents had and that they went to school with, and everybody knew each other or was related. It was a very different experience than what my kids see. I didn't necessarily grow up on a homestead because I don't know, did we not call it homesteading back then? I do kind of joke that I'm the black sheep of the homesteading world because I did grow up on a cattle ranch. My dad was a hunting guide. My mom always had gardens, and that was just kind of life for us. And I went on to major in agriculture and worked in commercial ag for 10 years. But when we did decide to switch to homesteading, I realized that we were not living the life that I thought we were, or that we had strived for.
In what ways?
I always thought that, well, we grow so much of our own food and we hunt a ton. So, I mean, our freezers were almost completely wild game or pigs or chickens that we had raised. But then I combined that with, store-bought chicken broth and, rice out of a box. And I was like, well, I'm cooking it at home with the meat that we procured ourselves. So, I mean, that's home cooking. And I just didn't realize that it wasn't until I dove way deeper into it. And I just realized I wanted my kids to actually grow up farming versus living kind of I don't want to say suburban life because we never lived suburban, but kind of living that suburban lifestyle, sports after school and, public school where I never saw my kids. And then they'd come home and have some farm chores, but they weren't farmers. They didn't get to see that whole picture and they didn't have that ownership that went with it.
Interesting. So is that why you decided to homeschool your children?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it wasn't one of those that it came into our head one day, like, yes, we need to homeschool. We had our oldest, he got in a little trouble at school. And so we brought him home. My husband's kicking and screaming. He did not want to homeschool our kids. And then the younger kids started being like, well, if he gets to stay home and do math, like they were my nerdy kids, my 14-year-olds now. They're like, we want to stay home and do math all day. So they thought it was, a treat. And next thing I know, I had everybody home and I told my husband, it was like January. I said, and my husband had just been diagnosed with liver disease, which was part of our whole food journey. And I said, let's just take this 6 months and spend some time together as a family and rebuild and decide how we want to live our lives. And if that doesn't work for us, the kids were homeschooling through a charter, so we could go right back to school in the fall and never even skip a beat. That was 7 years ago, and they have definitely not gone back.
Wow. Okay. So that's kind of big life changes there. And I think a lot of people can identify with that. A lot of people are, have experienced either a health crisis or maybe it was COVID and the world just wasn't quite what they thought it was, and, kind of opened their eyes to issues out there and they've decided to change their life. There's a lot of people who can identify with that, kind of like going on one route and then realizing it's time to make some major changes. And that can be hard to do when you're midstream. But on the other hand, when you know you're doing the right thing, that puts a lot of fuel behind it, doesn't it?
It does. The kids actually adapted to homeschooling better than my husband adapted to a whole food diet. So sometimes I'm still dragging him along.
Good. Well, it is amazing when people are young how adaptable they are, and it doesn't take
Mhm,
very long. So that's great. Um, so you started homeschooling just to get this bigger, like better experience for your children, a more
mhm,
connected experience. And that's certainly something that I've noticed that we never went to public, our kids have never gone to public school
mhm,
because I had maybe the opposite experience in high school, in school. I went to every different type of school there was. I was
mhm,
homeschooled, I was in, a very small private school, I was in a very large, arts academy private school, and I was in a massive high school where you were kind of just nameless. You were one of thousands of
mhm,
people there. And I just remember walking around and thinking, nobody's ever been able to answer to me why I should be wasting my time doing the things that I'm doing. And honestly, at that point, that answer of so you can be a well-rounded individual kind of fell hollow to me.
mhm.
And it still does to me as an adult. I still go, why was I taking calculus when, I didn't even know how to cook, except that my mom was a good cook, thankfully. But like, we
Mhm.
didn't even know how to take care of ourselves. As humans, we don't know how to take care of
Yep.
ourselves in very fundamental ways here in America. And to me, I'm going, oh my gosh, like people can barely pick up the phone and make appointments for themselves nowadays of the kids that I'm seeing coming out of the public school system.
Mhm.
Why are we even bothering trying to teach them advanced mathematics when we don't know how to boil water and,
Right.
cook a basic meal at home, much less raise our own food and preserve it. And to me, these two things, this inability to take care of ourselves in a basic way, and then this lack of self-esteem that is so pervasive that like you just see it in these poor children coming out nowadays. They can't talk to people, they can't look you in the eye, they don't know what to do with their lives besides look at a device. you
Yes.
know Everybody's got to be worried about the bully because the reality is all the other people can't stand up for themselves because they don't even have the self-esteem to say, hey, look, I have some value here.
It's an
And
absolutely
so
broken system.
it is very, very broken, and yet we keep kind of perpetuating it. And so when I look at, for me, homeschooling was just like, I am not putting my kids through that system. I'm not wasting their time. I'm not wasting their life. I want them to be able to actually do something with their life. So
Yeah.
I was like, I can fast track this for them. And it's amazing how much you can get done in 3 and 4 hours of the day of
Yeah.
what would take all day at a public school. And so that was kind of our story, which is different. And that's so important when talking about education is bringing out this idea of how different your household is going to look in
Mhm.
education versus my household. Do you like do you experience that as you're talking to a lot of people about homeschooling, this real big difference between how people homeschool?
Absolutely. I mean, I even homeschool each of my kids differently
Yeah.
because they have such different personalities and goals in life. And so I see that a lot with families. I mean, the biggest one is, I mean, I almost working in the homeschool world, it almost sounds like a broken record, but there's so many people that are trying to replicate school at home. And that's the beauty of homeschooling is that you don't have to. You can create whatever school environment works best for you. And, I say that we are eclectic traditional unschoolers. Which is all over the board, but it's that we will take a couple of days a week, and that's when we really focus on our math, English, like those skills that you need to be able to function in life, to be successful. And then we spend the rest of our week learning on the farm, learning through our businesses, which whether that's mine and my husband's businesses or my kids' individual businesses that they have. And just in experiencing life, and then I kind of sometimes do the mean mom thing where they ask, "Why do we do this on the farm?" And I'm like, "Well, let's go inside and look it up." And I
I
think
love
that's
that.
probably where they get most of their information.
Hmm. That's really great. So just taking what's going on in life that's really applicable to people and using that as a basis for educating them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's worked so great for our crew. And then we even have our 18-year-old who school was not right for him. It never was going to be, whether that was public school or homeschool. We tried every angle with him, and that was just a way that he was not going to learn.
Mm.
And at 15, he asked if he could get a job instead of doing school. And we're like, okay, on a trial basis, let's try that. And he immediately got a job where he was running the neighbor's business and went from there to working for an electrician. And at 18, he's an electrician's apprentice.
It's always interesting to me. We live in a community where there's a lot of Mennonite
Hmm.
churches. There's quite a few of them. And so they go to school through eighth grade. And we've actually, in our household, we use Mennonite curriculum for the elementary school grades because when I started looking at what they're learning, I'm
Yeah.
going, oh my goodness, if we could just get every child in America through this eighth grade education, we'd all be better off. It
Yeah.
is so just foundational and fundamental, but it has this focus on the basics, on the foundations, but then also on business, which is very interesting. And this is one of the things, again, like I was talking about in my story, that I find with so much of education is it doesn't really answer the question to kids who I think are asking it very honestly, why do I need to waste my time with this? It
Hmm.
doesn't, there's no context for it. Why am I doing all this math? Well, all of a sudden, when you put it in context of business, the math makes sense, right? And you put it in context of somebody's own bank account, and it makes even more sense, even more quickly.
Hmm.
We have some kids with some businesses too, and we've just really seen that like, boy, they figure that math out real fast as soon as they have their own business.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And yeah, even the Mennonites in our community, like even my husband, he goes, wow, they really have, our neighbor's farm. Like I went over there the other day and they really have it together. And I was like, well, this is why. And it's
Yeah.
because of where their focus is and their priorities.
So, what do you feel like homesteading can do for homeschooling? Let's look at it that way.
You know, um, it gives a learning opportunity in everything that you're doing. And with homesteading, I think it even goes beyond like the commercial farming that we see a lot. And there's like, the ag education where a lot of that is very cut and dry. Like, this is how you do it. And I mean, even if you talk to an old school farmer, he's going to tell you, like, this is just how we do it. And you do it that way, whether it works or not. And what I've found with homesteading is every day is an experiment. And so everything we do around the farm, we talk about it through the scientific method and use that for our problem solving. And I'm doing it myself all the time, every day. I have herbs in my window that I go, oh, I don't like how they look. I wonder if I did it this way. And in those moments, I find myself calling the kids in and being like, hey, my herbs died. Why do you think they died? Even if I already know why they did, I want to have that conversation with them all the time.
Mm.
And so, like I said, we go through that scientific method. We even go through the research steps of it if it's a bigger problem that we're having, or something that, are we going to decide to use antibiotics on this animal, or are we going to decide to vaccinate them? Well, let's look up the reasons why, look up what the laws are for our county or our state, and go through all those steps, similar to the way we would if we were, working for a university or something.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. That's a good point. Just that ability to turn everything into a learning experiment.
Mhm.
When you're doing so many things on the homestead, it really gives all of those opportunities to be able to do that because there's so many, whether you're gardening or you're into herbal medicine or you've got the animals. It's like it's so dynamic. There's so much to do.
Mhm.
Preserving all of those.
Oh, yeah.
Um, Character
Well, and then
wise is one area that I've really seen kids blossom when it comes to homesteading. Homeschooling can be part of that too.
mhm,
But I think just by nature of being part of an active homestead, kids actually build some character traits that they don't necessarily build by going to school or even by homeschooling. Um, do you see any of that in your experience also?
Oh, absolutely. The biggest one I see is the ownership.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that's when, when I look at, families that, when you work with other families, we've done it ourselves. How do you get your kids to do chores? I can't, they'll never take the trash out. And, I realize that there's these monotonous chores that have to happen every single day in a household. And, it's just one of those everybody helps thing. If you want dinner, you need to take the trash out so that I can get in there and cook dinner faster. But what I did there is I gave the reason behind it and put ownership into that chore. But what I've really found is on the homestead, I give my kids management jobs on the farm. And so it's not just their job to go feed, it's their job. Each kid has like a species that's their
Mm.
job. So, my younger kids, they're the chicken managers, and my older son, he handles, you know, I don't call him the pig manager. He doesn't think that's as cool as my 5-year-old does. But instead of just feeding, it's their responsibility to let me know if anybody looks sick or how many eggs we brought in, whether or not one of the pigs is ready to farrow because we live cover, so we don't always have an exact date. Um, and as a mom that's trying to run businesses and manage these kids and a house and a farm, them managing their own departments within my farm makes it where my biggest concerns are just, purchasing or making the big decisions and not making it where I can focus on the finances of our farm and the preserving and the things that are what my husband says above their pay grade. And I find that when they have that ownership and the autonomy that comes with that, they are they have more of a sense of responsibility. It's that personal responsibility that kids just don't have every day in normal life, I guess. I think our life is pretty normal, but um, that sense of responsibility, like they know why the chickens need water every day. It's not just mom's making me water the chickens. They understand that the chickens need that water to digest their food and maintain their temperature and all the things that it's not just a chore. It's on them.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
find that that's a big one. And then their pride when they can show their animals or they can educate other people about their animals or go to other farms and talk to adults about what's going on with their dairy herd.
Mm. Yeah. Even, one of the things that Josh and I really do is when we're sitting around the dinner table and we're having a meal and we'll be like, oh, look at that. Those are our chickens, that's on our plate. And remember so and so who took care of those, and we call out who was responsible for different
Oh,
elements on our
yeah.
plate. And, in some way that seems so little, but then I think about how I feel when everybody's like, oh, mom, this is a great zucchini vegetable dish that you made. Somebody calls it out. It's like even
Mhm.
I as an adult am like, oh, thank you, that was good. It makes you want to do better. It makes you feel good. And definitely the kids that, and it really helps complete, did I do this thing, but I'm being recognized for it, and I see how it's helping the family as a whole. And that just having that sense of reward is so important to the kids.
Mhm.
Another character trait that I've really seen that homesteading builds is problem solving. And this is one that I wish I could help every adult in America to have this skill. But when you're on the homestead, you have to constantly problem solve. And
Yes.
I know our kids see that.
Yeah, and, I bring our kids in on those conversations. Like, like I was saying with the herbs in the windowsill, but sometimes we're doing even more than that. We're, "Hey, we have a big problem or we need to make a big decision. Let's all sit down and talk about it." Whether it's our, 18-year-old, 14-year-old, or 5-year-old, we still let them have their input,
Yeah,
and sometimes they come up with the best ideas. And
they
ones that
really do.
and ones that they're willing to carry out. Because, sometimes we're like, hey, we have a problem. We're out of time to finish this project. They'll be like, hey, it would be a lot easier if I just handled that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely that willingness. When you can have input, it's a lot easier to have a willingness
Mhm.
to do the work behind it too. So that's really good. So I think sometimes especially for families who have not been doing this for a long time, um, you take homeschooling and you take homesteading, and it feels like they may be at odds with each other, especially if you're still trying to replicate a classroom,
Yes.
like do public school in your living room.
Yeah.
Um, then it feels like, oh my gosh, I've got homesteading takes up all this amount of time and homeschooling takes up this amount of time. And how do I get it all done? And I think this is one of those things where there has to be that mindset shift
Yeah.
where it's like, wait, these aren't enemies. They don't hurt each other. Actually, if we combine them, they make each other more powerful and they're really complementary.
Mhm.
Um, and so I know that's something that you've been really focusing on doing as you've been creating curricula that brings those two together, which is super fascinating. Like, talk to us about that and how you can bring those together, how those two things can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm the first to say that anyone can teach these topics at home. You know, take every opportunity you can to teach your kids, teach them proper terminology, get the books, use the scientific method. You would be surprised how much your kids just blossom through that. But when I started homeschooling my kids, being an ag major, having worked in commercial ag for 10 years, I knew that I could teach my kids ag, and I was so excited to teach them ag. And there was nothing out there. There was no homeschool curriculums on it, and everything that I could find using a public school curriculum really focused on the commercial ag, which I didn't feel like resonated with my homeschooled homesteading kids.
Mm.
So I started putting together lessons for them over several years. Um, and it was a lot of work. Like I was trying to do, homeschool, homestead, and basically write this whole curriculum for my kids. And I came across a post on Facebook one day where someone's like, wish I could, just have an open and go. I'm tired of gathering all these lessons together to teach my kids. And I realized that that was something I could do, that I could take it one step further beyond a how-to homestead lesson and make it a science lesson. Like take
Mm.
that ag science and put it with the small scale farming and the self-sufficiency and all the why behind everything we do.
Mhm.
And so I put together Homestead Science. I have stuff for preschoolers all the way through high school. I'm adding more all the time. I'm kind of a one-woman show, so at least when it comes to the creation department of my business. So it's a little slow going sometimes, but I just realized that even the seasoned homesteader, the agriculturalist who is homeschooling their kids, that just having that open and go curriculum where they can teach their kids about everything that they're already doing and have it be their science lesson because they're getting anatomy, biology, physiology, chemistry, microbiology, all those topics, while they're also getting to preserve food with their kids. They're getting a much higher level education out of that because they're getting the character, the science, the how to, and the kids feel like they're part of what's happening. Especially for those families that have just brought their kids into homesteading in the last few years, and they feel like, I went from this life to this life, and I don't know why we're doing this, and I don't know how to do this.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah,
So,
that is so great, and that really answers that, like, why am I doing this? This just inherently has reason behind why you're learning science.
yeah.
Why am I learning chemistry? Why am I learning,
Yeah.
anatomy? All of a sudden, it makes sense when you're doing it based around something that your family's involved in and that you're doing all the time. And so I think right there, that gets over a major hurdle
Mhm.
for kids and in the education system. That's something I just continue to see, even as I was a teacher, you know, you know, we all say to our kids struggling with algebra, if you think you can't, right? Like
Exactly.
it's just a reality of human nature that if you tell yourself you can't, if you're so busy sitting there asking yourself, why am I doing this? Like, I don't care
Mhm.
about chemistry. I'm not interested in chemistry. Why? You're never really going to get around to the learning the chemistry. So if
Right.
you take that whole question right away from the kids and you're like, "Hey, this is the context it's in because this is what we're doing out in our backyard." All of a sudden it's like, "Oh, that's what's going on within that jar when we're canning," or "That's what's
Mhm.
happening here," or "That's what's going on there." And it just connects those dots and it makes it meaningful. So
Yeah.
not only is that gonna get past that hurdle of why, but it's also gonna help their brains remember it more because it has something to connect to,
Yeah.
and it might even have a physical activity that goes along with it that, you're standing around butchering chickens. This is happens in our household.
Mhm.
You're having a big chicken butchering day and everybody's like, "Ah, that's the, such and such. We were just learning about this. Like, now I know what it looks like," and they're poking at it and they're like, "Okay, that is real up close and personal dissecting biology." Like, there's no joking around it about it, but it makes sense.
You know what? I remember being, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years old, and my dad had gone bear hunting, and he let me have the eyeballs, and it was, like, best day ever. I thought it was amazing. So, I might be a little extra on the nerdy side, but I get so excited about this stuff, and then I see kids get so excited, and, even the math I have in my book, because it's so applied, when they can't figure it out, like, I if my kids can't figure out an algebra problem, I'm like, "Work it again, try it again, test your theory, test your answer," and they're like, "Psh." They don't care, they don't wanna do it.
Right.
And to be able to apply that to, like, one of the ones that is probably the longest math problem in my book, but everybody gets the biggest kick out of, is all of the inputs to raise a steer or a hog,
Mm.
and then how much you end up paying per pound at the end, and then you compare that to the grocery store. And, if your final answer is $100 a pound, you probably did something wrong. And they either actually whether it's your math or your inputs, I don't know, but it's, um, it actually the kids get excited and they wanna know why, and they wanna rework that, and they wanna try to get a lower answer, even if they get $15 a pound, and, like, that's still pretty on the high side. Let's look at, what were your inputs?
Yeah.
And I've really seen kids get super excited about that. Kids that absolutely refuse to do math in another sense. I've had their parents reaching out to me and being like, "When's your next book coming out? Because my kid actually wants to do this."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that just takes education, so much further because what is often said in the homeschool world is that, right now what we have is schooling in public
Mhm.
school. We don't have education.
No.
People are just learning stuff, but they have no sense of how to actually apply it. And when you take that
Mhm.
math and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, the decisions I'm making today on how to feed my animal, actually, because of the math problem, now I can understand my profit and my this and my that. Like, it helps you apply that education, it helps you apply what you're actually learning through the math and make, qualified decisions,
Mhm.
which is something you don't ever do when you're in just an average, let's say, high school business
Mhm.
math or math. You
Yeah.
never go, okay, how do I have to adjust the decisions that I'm making today about things that I'm doing today? Because I can see through this math problem where I'm going to end up being in a final result. Like, that just, I can't even think of a possible scenario where your
Right?
average high school math would do that. And this just puts it in that context. And so it helps to apply the education that we're giving children,
Mhm.
which is just
And,
golden.
my kids, I still make them do algebra, but at least now they see a reason for doing algebra.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. That's really good. So tell us a little bit more about your curriculum that you've been creating.
Oh, yeah.
You said you have stuff all the way from preschool all the way up to high school.
Mhm.
So,
So
yeah.
yeah. So for my preschoolers, I have the Homestead Alphabet. It's kind of the standard alphabet coloring book, but it has animal facts. And instead of, B is for ball, We have B is for, I guess I should have looked that up before, but some animal. You write the books and then once it's down, you kind of forget. But
Yep.
it's I remember like D is for dairy, Q is for quilt, instead of some of the more standards that you see. And like the little kids, I find they get more excited about the animals.
Mhm.
And then not only are there animal facts for each one, I also have 26 homestead activities you can do as a family that kind of lock in what you're doing. I mean, some of them are, E is for egg, and then you do an egg drop, kind of a standard one. But then I have others. U is for udder, and you make homemade udder balm using essential oils. So there's you're getting to do a little bit of everything.
Mm.
I do some character in there. There's, suggesting for the kids to, donate to the animal shelters and that type of thing. As they get into the older ages, I have Build Your Own Homestead, it's a textbook that comes with a 2x3 poster where, as they learn about each thing that they're doing on their homestead, they add it to their poster homestead. And by the time they're done, they can see how their whole food system works together. And it teaches that long-term, goals. Like they get that daily instant gratification of, I learned about a chicken, and then they add their chicken to their homestead. And then the next day they learn about what chickens eat and they add that to their homestead. And then at the end they get their homestead deed. So they finished all their improvements. So I found that with the Build Your Own Homestead, it focuses more towards the younger kids. And so I put together an expansion pack that goes through each step of why we do those homestead improvements. So, if you paint your barn red, then you get a whole lesson on why we historically have painted our barns red, and then how to do a homemade red paint experiment. So it goes through all those steps. And then I have my high school version, which has been or junior high and high school, which has been my big seller. That is Introduction to Homestead Science. That's a 300-page full year ag science. I
Wow.
call it ag science to really clarify that it's an applied science. And that covers, it starts with like buying land, tractors, animal science, plant science, food science, herbalism, hunting and fishing, first aid, and homestead management. So this fall, I'm coming out with Homestead History, which is a full year U.S. history, which I'm going to have more of a focus on food and ag sociology rather than government, except for the government parts that go into food. Instead of covering everything that's happening in a battlefield, I'm talking about like the K-packs that the soldiers were eating.
Very interesting. Wow,
Yeah.
that'll be a lot of fun. And I love the simplicity of bringing them in together because, like you said, there's the activity that goes along with it. I'm sure there's a lot of ways to take the things that you're already having to do on the homestead and apply those types of activities right in there and make them work.
Mm-hmm.
So that is just a really fun way of looking at education and putting some pieces together. It's also a great way of maybe getting some mileage out of stuff you're already doing for homeschooling, which is
Mm-hmm.
really anybody who's running a busy homestead and homeschool knows it's always beneficial wherever you can cross benefit, things
Right.
like that. Save a little bit of time. And I love, Kody, how you said right at the beginning, like the curriculum's here to help, but these are things that whether you end up with a curriculum like this or not, this is the way to start thinking about homeschooling, right?
Yeah.
Is like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you integrate it? How do you bring it together with life and not have these separated things of like, this is homeschool and this is homestead and then this is just the rest of our real life, right? It's
Yeah.
like, no, this is just all real life and let's pull it all
Mm-hmm.
back together. And so I really like that. And thank you for creating great resources to help us bring it together in
Oh,
a
I
little
appreciate
bit more easy, straightforward way. I really like that. So thank you so much. Hey, you guys, check out the link that we have for you on to Kody's website and to her item. So we will share that below. Give us real fast. It's just thehomesteadeducation.com. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So you want to go check that out. Either way, think about bringing your kids home if they're in public school so that they can start getting an education that maybe makes a little bit more sense to them and the skills they're going to actually need in this world as it's a changing world. And they may need to know how to take care of themselves and people around them a little bit better. Make sure one way or another they're gaining those skills and the self-confidence that they need to move forward in life. Thank you so much, Kody, for joining us, and we'll see you guys all later. Goodbye.